You know, I had a whole bit for this intro, but I just realized how unimaginably cringe it would have been, so this is the intro. The sentiment that modern gaming sucks while reminiscing about the good old days when video games were way better is something growing in popularity. On a certain level, you can kind of understand why. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one with an insane library backlog of high-quality AAA titles that I just keep putting off playing. But why? Why does gaming feel like less of a hobby and more of a chore? A fucking to-do list. Why do video games just not feel as good as they used to? Well, see, I actually sort of disagree with that statement, sort of. But before I elaborate, let's talk about why we tend to feel this way. There are a few reasons why some modern video games feel so boring at the best and downright horrible at the worst. And as a surprise to no one, a lot of this has to do with the corporatization of the gaming industry. Now, what do I mean by that? The phrase, the corporatization of the gaming industry, is actually kind of misleading. The gaming industry has always been corporate. It's always been run by men in suits who don't actually play the games their companies make. That hasn't changed. So, what has? Well, I think the difference now is simply that the gaming industry is a relatively new one, and this is just the natural progression of it as it grows larger and larger. In the earlier days, fewer games existed, and publishers would constantly be looking for the next potential hit. This fostered a breeding ground for innovation within the gaming industry. The play wasn't just to do what the other guys were doing, but to do something unique. And I'm not saying clones didn't exist, of course. For every Halo there was a Haze, but the degree of which the gaming industry fostered innovation was far greater back then. Thus, we saw more unique titles doing different things. The play by the corpos was to go out and find the next big hit. But now, they either already have their big hit and keep making it over and over, or they just do what's popular. Games were also less complex and cheaper to make relative to now, which means the investment risk is far greater. This is why large AAA studios tend to play it safe. With doing something new comes the risk that the new thing won't catch on. This often isn't worth it due to the cost of developing these AAA titles, especially when an existing formula has already proven to be profitable. This is what led to the rise of franchise games like the early COD and FIFA, which I'm pretty sure isn't a thing anymore because EA lost their stranglehold on football games, or soccer games for people in the land of the free. Titles like these rarely actually improve on their predecessors. This lack of innovation is likely one of the reasons why video games don't excite you anymore. It's definitely a contributor to why it doesn't excite me. So when I say the corporatization of video games, I don't necessarily mean the industry is more corporate than it's been before, but more so that the creativity and freedom to innovate that was given to these devs is now gone in the pursuit of green by the suits. The corporate side is making these decisions now, at least that's how it feels. I'm not a dev, so I can't say for sure. But I doubt any developer actually wants to make a lot of the worst games we're getting these days. Another symptom of this corporatization, and something that could potentially contribute to yours and my feeling of dissatisfaction with the industry, is the rising popularity of remasters and remakes. Like I said before, making a AAA video game is a large investment risk, as these games are ungodly expensive. So instead of taking on this risk, corpos will often greenlight remakes of older titles, banking on people's nostalgia to sell copies. Even when these remakes are done well, I still believe it's a net negative for the industry as a whole. So instead of news stories and experiences, we can just experience the same thing we have before. At least the yearly COD we used to get would give us a unique narrative through the campaign, even if it wasn't that interesting. These remakes often also devalue older experiences. I mean, why go experience the original Resident Evil 4? I'd say the remake is a way better way to play it, looking past the censorship of course. In the worst cases, it's straight up no longer possible to experience the original game. When Rockstar released the remaster for their mainline 3D era Grand Theft Auto titles, they delisted the originals from Steam, meaning it's no longer possible to legally play the original versions of these older games. So gamers really have no choice but to sail the 7 seas, not to condone piracy, of course. This is even more painful considering these remasters are arguably a worse way to experience these older games. The remastering and reselling of GTA 5 excites no one. The game is a living carcass, a relic from years past. No one should be paying any more than $20 for that game, yet Rockstar has the gall to charge 40 big ones for it. I swear, they get away with so much shit. I gotta make a video on that. I'm not necessarily saying all remakes and remasters are bad. I think it's great to allow a newer generation to experience older games. I only really got into gaming in the past 7 years, so there's plenty of titles I wouldn't have played if they were remade. The RE4 remake is amazing. That's coming from a guy who's never played the original, of course. That being said, the original RE4 was always there, ready to be played by anyone willing to figure it out. Resources shouldn't be put into fully remaking these titles. We should be making new experiences, new ideas, new concepts to get excited about. It's hard to feel enthusiastic about a game that already existed being remade. Another really bad issue, in my opinion, is the oversimplification of a lot of modern video games. In the pursuit of selling as many copies as possible, we see a trend in a lot of modern, mostly Western video games. Titles being streamlined to appeal to the widest possible audience. Now, on paper, this doesn't sound all that bad. Making video games more accessible to more people is good, right? And yeah, except this streamlining isn't just making the games more accessible, it's purposefully degrading the experience. Bethesda is the textbook example of this. Every Elder Scrolls game since Morrowind has been more or less simplified, and there's also a consistent fumbling of the Fallout IP. Funny how the best Bethesda RPG wasn't even made by Bethesda Game Studios, but I digress. Point is, simplifying or streamlining games only seeks to betray the core audience of any title. This streamlining isn't unique to Bethesda, of course. A lot of games have gotten simplified over the years in an attempt to not appeal to their core audience, but to appeal to everyone. This is rarely to the game's benefit. But AAA titles are so expensive to make that trying to appeal to the widest possible audience seems like the logical choice. While there is some truth in this, we've seen many titles do really well, not by appealing to everyone, but to commit to their core audience. Larian Studios' Baldur's Gate 3 always comes to mind, but it's not like it's not possible to appeal to a wider audience without diminishing the quality of your game. Look at Elden Ring, it was able to capture an audience far greater than any other FromSoft title while maintaining their original fanbase. So streamlining is definitely one of those things we could use less of. So my Steam library is packed with a lot of high quality games I still haven't played for any reasonable amount of time. Maybe some of you can relate, but how come? Well, for me, it's simple. These big budget AAA games are often really long. When I start playing a game, I like to experience the entire main narrative and have the credits roll within a few days. It shouldn't take me more than a few weeks to play through any video game. Unfortunately, I'm also in school, so I don't really have time for ridiculously long gaming sessions anymore. I'm less likely to approach these large titles because I know there's such a time investment. And hey, I get it, if you're paying $70 for a game, it better be 70 hours worth of content. But having a story be super drawn out is never fun in my eyes. It's one of the reasons I still haven't played through Red Dead Redemption 2 yet. I know any game made by Rockstar is a crazy time investment, especially on your first playthrough. This might just be a me thing, but I'm sure some of you keep putting off playing certain titles because you don't feel like you really have the time to invest in them. It's also risk assessment because you don't really know if the game you're gonna play is gonna be worth it. Will you actually enjoy the game in question? Longer games aren't always better. I think Ubisoft taught us that. So that's all bad, but by far the thing that makes me the most disinterested with the gaming industry is toxic monetization practices. But before we even talk about that, we should talk about live service games. But even before that, a word from this video's sponsor. Me. What do you thought? You thought I had an actual sponsor? Bro, I got like 150 subs. You should just like and subscribe and stop being a moron. Come on, let's get back to the video. With the advancement that was the internet, there are certain innovations that came to the video game industry. The ability to release patches to fix bugs after your game is released, the introduction of online multiplayer experiences, add-on DLC content that could be delivered digitally. Yeah, a lot of positive stuff, we like all that. Another positive development was live service games. These were games that didn't have an inherent beginning or end, but would be consistently updated over time. This meant, in theory, these games would live as long as players played them and developers were willing to allow support. But we can't have nice things. Contrary to the theory, live service games aren't really immortal, and eventually dwindle in player and become unprofitable, thus support ends. The problem is most of these games are always online, so players are dependent on the studio providing servers to actually play the game. When these games die, it means you no longer have access to the game at all. Now, a lot of these games are free to play, but not all of them. This means you could have potentially paid for a game, then completely lose access to it, more often than not with no reimbursement. In the best case scenario, the game will allow community servers to be hosted, so even after official servers are down, you might still be able to play the game with your buddies. A perfect example of the worst case scenario is Ubisoft's The Crew. In this instance, they literally revoke player licenses, really emphasizing the fact that you don't own your games in the modern day. These corporations reserve the rights to completely take these titles from you. An example of the best case scenario was a battle royale from a few years back called Spellbreak. When the game shut down, the devs released a community build of the game, free for anyone to access and host their own servers. This also included all the in-game cosmetics now available for free. Community servers are really pivotal to the preservation of any live service game, because they'll all die someday. You know, Ubisoft is really awful with this. You remember Hyperscape? Yeah, probably not. It wasn't very good. But still, this game literally doesn't exist anymore, as in you can't play it. It's been completely erased, which even if the game sucks, we can all agree that it should still be preserved. I could go on and on about live service games that literally don't exist anymore because of the complete disregard for game preservation by the corpos, but I digress. But that's not the only downside to live service games, and this next one is way more personal and might not apply to all of you, but hear me out. More than any other type, live service games feel the most like a chore. Like I'm gonna get kicked out on the street if I don't play them. The game that really made me feel this way the most, I used to play this game a lot about 2 years or so, give or take. And it was fun for like the first 3 months I played it, but then not so much. But after a while, I finally built up the courage to stop playing this game. I genuinely hated it. It was this really weird, fucked up, toxic relationship where I hated the game but would still play it every day. And I mean, I did spend an embarrassing amount of money on Valorant skins, so I felt like I had to play it. I invested so much into it, not playing the game anymore would almost validate the reality that I just wasted $900 on nonsense. Didn't help that I bought the battle pass, which I'll talk about later on because those really suck. And I wasn't even good at the game. I think I peaked at like fucking silver or some shit. And to be fair, I rarely played competitive, but still. What's wild is that spending $900 isn't even that wild in the Valorant community. Which perfectly transitions me back into monetization. Corporations exist to make money. The fundamental motivation behind any decision they make is to get paid.
Do you guys not have phones? Yeah.
Yes, we do. Everyone has a phone. That's why it should be no surprise that the largest gaming market is the mobile one. As a PC gamer, I can say I'm often oblivious to the horrors of mobile game monetization, but I used to be a pretty big mobile gamer back in the day before I had a computer. Mobile games are insanely lucrative, so a lot of the larger AAA studios making our big budget games also have a mobile division. Ubisoft, Activision, EA, not to mention the rise of mobile gacha games like Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail and stuff like that. But even in Microsoft's recent acquisitions, one of the largest studios they got, and one that people don't seem to pay attention to, is King. A lot of these games seem to be fundamentally built around getting you to spend money from the moment you install them. Unfortunately, many elements of games like this tend to bleed over into the console and the PC market, and we've seen monetization kinda go through many phases. So there was the loot box craze, surprise mechanics, we saw in virtually every live service game, and now it's the Battle Royale and the Season Pass craze popularized by Fortnite. Loot boxes were literally just slot machines, so it makes sense why they eventually got butt-fucked by certain governments. Better not to tell them about Valve and the Counter-Strike skin market. So the battle passes seem a lot less offensive, right? Well, yeah, but not by much. On paper they sound great. You pay a relative small amount up front, and as you play the game, you get XP or rewards you can use to level up a battle pass and get items they offer. It's a cheaper overall price than if the items were released normally in the game's shop. Season passes are similar but usually relate to DLC, where you can pay a sum up front for a collection of DLC instead of buying them individually. Here's the problem though, you're paying for items you haven't gotten. In the case of the Battle Pass, you often need to grind for upwards of 50 hours to get all the rewards, meaning you're literally playing to grind the game. This often makes the game you're playing feel like a chore, as if you don't, you're not really reaping the benefits of your purchase. That's partially why I grew to hate Valorant. I wanted the items in the Battle Pass so I would pay the $10, but the amount of grinding necessary to get all these items was so much I slowly started to hate the game. And of course, once that time period they set ends, the battle pass goes away, and so does any of the items you didn't collect. Most games do give you the options to just buy the battle pass items outright, but this is often so impossibly expensive that it's really hard to justify. Season passes aren't much better because by getting it, you're basically buying DLC that isn't even guaranteed to be good, as some season passes will include some upfront but also future DLC. But battle passes and season passes are popular because these game stores are usually insanely predatory. Valorant is known for its ridiculously overpriced skins. To buy a collection and fully upgrade it, that might cost you upwards of $300 in some instances, which is pretty nuts. Another common practice is how they sell you in-game currency. What you'll see is in some games, if an item costs 220 credits, they sell you packs of credits for like 200 and 400 a piece. So if you want the item, you gotta shell out the 400 credits to get the pack. These toxic monetization trends aren't getting any less popular. The corporals realize that live service titles they can stuff elements into to milk their player base dry is insanely lucrative, so we see more and more live service games. Everyone wants to make the next Fortnite to print money. But what really pisses me off is when studios have the audacity to actually monetize single-player game. Imagine paying $70 for a game to then realize they're charging for in-game items. Some players will defend this shit by saying, oh well, you don't have to engage with it, or you can get the items for free in-game. And ultimately, dude, I just don't care. It's a matter of principle, but I digress. Toxic monetization isn't going anywhere. In recent years, it's only been getting worse and creeping into places we all hope it wouldn't. Seeing all of this makes me feel a decent amount of apathy towards modern games. These video games nowadays aren't really art, they're product, soulless money printing machines. I don't think the majority of modern games are worse than they were in years past. It just feels worse because it's those same games done over and over to the point of stagnation. This isn't to say some game franchises haven't gotten worse. I mean, Bethesda. Our lack of excitement for modern titles is mostly rooted in the reality that rarely do we see games do new things. It's just the same shit we've been seeing for years. Every new title looks super formulaic. Couple that with live service chore games and toxic money milking tactics, that's why I'm not a huge fan of modern AAA titles. And note I said AAA titles. Well, here's my solution. You should have seen it coming because it's pretty obvious, but in simple terms, the solution is to step away from the AAA Western corporate slob and look to smaller AA and indie experiences. The corporate hold on these smaller studios is far more limited. For one, there's certain indie studios who don't have any corporate ties at all, and even the ones who do likely have far more creative freedom because the games they make are significantly cheaper. Thus, the investment risk by the corpos is lower. A game like Minecraft could only have been made by an indie developer, because on paper, Minecraft wouldn't have seemed like a particularly profitable prospect. And now, it's the best-selling game of all time. I mean, it's not the most profitable, but still. My point is, if you feel complete apathy towards the gaming industry, it's time to look beyond these AAA titles. And I'm gonna talk about a few indie and AA titles that have really grabbed me in recent months. A while back, I played a game called Gris, which was this really charming platformer about a woman going through the different stages of grief. It's definitely not for everyone, as there isn't really combat, but it's an amazing gaming experience. There's this other title I played called Pathless, which has one of the most innovative movement mechanics I've ever seen in games. So if you're tired of movement in games feeling super boring, that's another title I'd recommend. A more popular game, but one there's a good chance you might not have played, is Kena Bridge of Spirits. It's probably one of the most charming games I've ever played just visually. It has an amazing art style and the gameplay isn't horrible. It plays sort of like a Souls-like in a way, but I thought it was an amazing experience. Now, just because I like these games doesn't necessarily mean you like them too. And that's the thing, there's so many of these smaller budget titles out there that there's likely something for everyone. One of the most important qualities that all these games have in common is that they're not very long. Playing them isn't a crazy time investment, while still feeling like complete experiences. But it's not like AAA gaming is dead. There's still many big budget experiences that I think are definitely worth it. At the time of writing this script, I'm waiting in anticipation of the release of the Elden Ring DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. And I hope to God I finish this video before it releases, as when it does, my productivity is gonna drop to fucking zero. I've put almost 800 hours into base Elden Ring, and at this point, I can confidently say it's one of, if not my favorite game of all time. And to think, I initially shrugged it off as just another generic fantasy game when it first launched. Another relatively popular AAA game I recently played was one from a few years back called Control. I actually bought this game a while back but never really got into it until recently. It isn't just another one of those copy-pasted games. The gameplay actually feels pretty unique. Another trend that's been growing in popularity that I just want to talk about for a second is early access games. This is video games that aren't exactly complete, but are partially released to the public, which often leads to gamers being more involved in development as they could offer valuable feedback. And it's a pretty good model, in theory. I think it's kind of ridiculous that they charge up to $40 for a game that isn't even complete. It's basically the same incomplete messes that have been getting so common, but nah, we'll just slap early access on it, but we will still take your money though. I got a feeling Baldur's Gate 3 is gonna be the exception and not the rule. It's not even that early access games are bad, some of them are just a little expensive for what they are. Just don't buy early access games. Don't make my mistake, your money's better spent on games that are actually complete. All that being said, in general, we often gravitate towards AAA titles. Video games might be a risky investment for the corpos, but the same holds true for consumers. Maybe not to the same extent, but still. A lot of us have a limited amount of time. We can't play everything under the sun, so we're more likely to stick to the large studios we know. Going out trying random indie games, hoping one of them will be good, isn't something everyone is willing or even has the time to pull off. To these individuals, the gaming industry might seem worse, even though it's just the game studios they're not willing to move beyond. So instead of dropping $70 on the next big budget AAA slob, maybe put on a skeptical lens before you do, as there's a chance your coin might serve you better in the indie or AA section. And also, please don't fanboy over these corpos. I'm gonna make a video on that at some point, so stay tuned. Anyways, that's the end of this video, so thanks for watching. Later.